Order, order. We start with questions to the Secretary of State for Scotland, Christine Jardine.
Number one, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government wants to ensure farmers and food producers get a fair price for their products by tackling unfairness that exists in food supply chains. We're currently pursuing contractual reform in the dairy and pork sectors and have launched a new review of the egg sector. This will ensure resilience and fair supply chains across the country.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much. My constituents in Edinburgh West, like so many others across the country, are finding it, however, increasingly difficult to source affordable, nutritious food. The situation has been made worse by flooding in Scotland and international pressures like the war in Ukraine, energy prices and Brexit. There are enterprises like Lauriston Farm in my community which can provide good local food. What is the government doing to support projects like that, and also to offset the impact on our food producers of recent flooding?
Minister.
I recognise the points that the Honourable Lady makes in terms of the pressures on the food supply chain. The UK Government is closely monitoring the impacts of the flooding caused by storms on the agricultural sector and working with the Environment Agency to resolve that. Now, DEFRA can provide financial assistance to the farming sector to cover uninsurable losses incurred as a result of exceptional flooding by activating the Farming Recovery Fund. I would encourage the Honourable Lady to contact my colleague, the Honourable Member for Keighley, the excellent new Minister for Water at DEFRA, for more information.
I now come to Shadow Minister. Welcome to position.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to be here, although I have to say there wasn't particularly stiff competition for the role from Scotland. Mr. Speaker, inflation may be slowly coming down, but food inflation in Scotland still stands at more than 10%, forcing families to choose between being able to eat or heat their homes, or, in the case of the increasing levels of destitution, neither. Thousands of people in Scotland are turning to food banks not as a one-off last resort, but as a means of getting by week after week. It's clear both our governments should be working together much better to tackle this. So what specific steps will the Minister take to work with the Scottish Government and the food industry to ensure food prices do not continue to rise at unaffordable rates? And does he really believe that the autumn statement will give families any confidence that the Government understands how difficult it is for people in Scotland right now?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I welcome the Honourable Member to his new position. I recognise the points he makes about stiff competition, but nonetheless, I very much welcome him to his position. This Government is absolutely committed to tackling the rising prices that households are facing, which is why the Prime Minister has an absolute focus on reducing the levels of inflation. But he is right, both governments should be working together to alleviate pressures on household budgets. And this government has demonstrated through the huge support that has been put in place to support households, both in respect of energy prices and other measures, to ensure that the financial help that is able to be put in place is being put in place to support hard-pressed households.
Jamie Stone.
Number two, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, with permission, I will answer questions 2 and 12 together. The United Kingdom Government continues to provide significant support to the National Post Office network, adding up to more than £2.4 billion over the last 10 years. Mr. Speaker, this funding has enabled 98% of individuals living in rural areas to live within 3 miles of the nearest post office in 2022, with the overall network as large today as it has been for 5 years.
Jamie Stone.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Our rural branches of the Post Office are at the very core, the very heart of our rural communities. At present, His Majesty's Government does provide certain services to the public via this Post Office network. Does the Minister agree with me that it would be a good notion to encourage the Scottish Government to go down the same route and to provide as many services as possible, thus ensuring the future of these branches?
Mr. Speaker, I agree with the Honourable Member. I recognise the vital importance of post offices for constituents in rural communities such as his own and also in my own constituency in the Scottish Borders. It is, of course, for the Scottish Government to assess how to make their services available for people across Scotland, considering accessibility as well as value for money for the taxpayer. However, I'd be happy to facilitate a meeting between my colleagues in the Department for Business and Trade to see what further encouragement we could put on the Scottish Government to use the Post Office network for the delivery of their services.
Richard Ford.
please, Mr. Speaker. Scotland has seen the closure of 40 post offices in the last 2 years. Yet, as my honourable friend for Caithness, Sutherland and Easter Ross points out, these communities still have post offices. Those communities that still have them are losing access to government services, particularly in rural areas. The driver and vehicle licensing agency services are currently due to cease from being available at post offices from the end of next March. What conversations has he had with the Department for Business and Trade about keeping these DVLA services open from post offices?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I should start by correcting the honourable member in that the post office network is actually not being in decline. It's actually, there's been more post offices opened than closed over the past year, but we do see fluctuations in different parts of the country, with many postmasters running a franchise business in their own right, and many are facing the same challenges as many high street businesses are. Now, the DVLA and the post office extended their contracts until the 31st of March 2024. The post office network operates commercially at arm's length from the government and is responsible for taking decisions on commercial matters such as the DVLA contract.
Mr. Speaker.
Stay.
Mr. Speaker, with permission, I will answer questions 3 and 13 together. With devolved powers, the Scottish Government can tailor policy in areas such as health, education and justice, as well as tax and welfare throughout the additional powers in the Scotland Act 2016. The UK Government is working with local government and local partners to deliver for their needs and wishes. And, Mr. Speaker, this is real devolution in action.
Mr. Speaker, climate change talks at COP28 begin tomorrow. One of the most important issues to be agreed upon at the conference is the Climate Loss and Damage Fund. The Secretary of State will know that Scotland has led the way on this, becoming the first country in the global north to pledge financial support to address loss and damage. Yet the Secretary of State and his Conservative colleagues are intent on limiting the Scottish Government's international engagement. So can the Secretary of State tell me why he wants to silence Scotland's voice and prevent us from providing this global leadership?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's very straightforward. I mean, we understand that there will be environmental engagement overseas from the Scottish Government, and that's a devolved matter. But what we've tried to get a grip on is the Scottish Government travelling overseas, meeting ministers, discussing reserved areas, the constitutional affairs, discussing foreign affairs, and straying away from the portfolio of matters that are devolved to them. And that is our position.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's plainly obvious that in order to cement a sense of economic resilience, Scotland requires a population growth strategy. But the devolution settlement, unfit though it is, won't come anywhere near it, and the government continues to set its face against it. Can he explain why?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I mean, the position is that the Scottish Government, if they want more people to settle in Scotland, and immigration is at a record high, they need to build more housing, they need to have lower taxes, they need to have better public services and make Scotland more attractive to people.
Mundell.
Does my right honourable friend share my disappointment that the SNP Green Scottish Government continue to use the devolution settlement as a platform to pursue constitutional grievances? And isn't the reality for the people of Scotland and achieving the best outcome for our constituents to see the two governments work together on a project, for example, like the A75, where if the governments work together, it'll actually be delivered?
Well, I absolutely agree with my right honourable friend. I mean, the A75 came up, along with the A77, as vital routes of importance in the Union Connectivity Review by then Sir Peter, now Lord Hendy. And we are working together, finally, with the Scottish Government. The UK Government is funding a feasibility study for the upgrade of the 75, and I'm delighted that progress is being made.
Leanne Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is it not the case that the Scottish Government has consistently strayed outside the limits of the devolution settlement? So it's very difficult to take the SNP seriously as defenders of devolution when they have so little respect for the current settlement.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is right. The Scottish Government, everyone forgets that the Scottish Government get up every day and go to work to destroy devolution, to destroy the United Kingdom. The defenders of devolution, the strengtheners of the United Kingdom, are this government.
Secretary of State, Ian Murray.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Can I take this opportunity to congratulate my new honourable friend for Rutherglen and Hamilton West, not only on his vast promotion and fast promotion to the shadow front bench, but also on his 20.4% swing from the SNP that brought him that by-election victory. Mr Speaker, the announcement to close the refinery at Grangemouth is a hammer blow. Too many communities are still living with the devastation from being left behind after coal mine closures in the 1980s. This must not be allowed to happen again. Grangemouth's owner is buying football clubs and investing in plants elsewhere, while the workers here lose out. And the Prime Minister has decided a culture war on the environment trumps getting the UK into the global green energy race by backing Labour's green energy superpower plans. So the devolution settlement demands both governments work together, but they certainly don't. So can the Secretary of State say what discussions he is having with the Scottish Government to protect jobs at Grangemouth and what impact this will have on the Acorn carbon capture and storage project?
Well, Mr Speaker, first of all, it's a very worrying time for those whose jobs are at risk at the Grangemouth refinery. And so this morning, my fellow minister met with Neil Gray from the Scottish Government, and we also, Desnes, Department of Energy Minister, was present. We've also had, yesterday, I think, my fellow minister had a meeting with the local authority. So work is going on. There is an irony, though, but the Scottish Government want to shut down oil and gas, and when this happens, suddenly people realise that it's actually about managing a transition and taking us gradually to net zero, but protecting people's livelihoods. On the point you make about Acorn and the Scottish cluster, I have spoken to the Chief Executive of Storiga, who are basically pulling the project together. He tells me that the refinery closing actually has very little impact on their project because they were at Grangemouth supplying the blue hydrogen to the refinery and others, and it was the emissions from making the blue hydrogen that was going back up to be put into the North Sea. So little impact.
Mr Speaker, it's the 25th anniversary of the Scottish Parliament next year, one of this Labour Party's proudest achievements, but recently it's been riven with failure and scandal, from 1 in 7 on NHS waiting lists and ferries to iPads and camper vans. But much has been made as to the dual role of the government-appointed Lord Advocate, who sits in the Scottish Cabinet while presiding over prosecutions in Scotland. Can I ask the Secretary of State what discussions he has had with the Scottish Government on Anna Sarwar's idea to have the dual role of Scotland's top law officer split to maintain the separation of powers between the government and the judiciary?
Secretary of State.
Well, Mr Speaker, as my honourable gentleman will know, the Director of Public Prosecutions in England is appointed by a panel, and there is, therefore, it removes risk of perceived interference by government. Many of our learned friends have expressed their concern to me at the current structure in Scotland and the closeness between the judiciary and the government. And what I would say is that I find their concerns understandable, and I would also say that it's vitally important that the public perception is that the prosecution service is seen to be very, very independent from government.
Select Committee to speak with Sharp.
And I'm sure the Secretary of State would agree with me that his mission to constrain and to bypass the Scottish Parliament has been an absolute disaster for devolution, with the relationships across the whole of the UK never being at such a low level. Will he acknowledge that his version of aggressive unionism has utterly failed, and as he is leaving his office, will he now pledge to abandon it entirely?
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm not entirely sure what I've done that's been a failure, to be honest. Mr Speaker, this is the government that protects devolution. We are protecting the settlement, and if he refers to, for instance, the Section 35 order I used, that was in the Scotland Act in 1998. It was voted for at the time by SNP MPs, and it's there to protect devolution when a devolved administration legislates in GB or UK matters.
Martin Day.
Mr Speaker, the UK Government has no intention of devolving legislative competence for employment rights to the Scottish Parliament. Employers and employees benefit hugely from a single, simple system where employment rights are the same across Great Britain, whether you're working in Derby or Dundee, and we do not see any benefit in changing this arrangement.
devolution of employment law is supported by the STUC, the TUC, by workers' rights group, by a majority in the Scottish Parliament, by the public. It would benefit workers by having their governments compete to give them better rights, prevent a race to the bottom. What's not to like? So why won't his government consider it?
Well, I refer the honourable gentleman to my original answer, which is we believe that it's right that you have a simple system that works across the United Kingdom, whether you are, as I said, in Derby or in Dundee.
Sir Oliver Hill.
The Secretary of State agree with me that to have different employment laws either side of the border would be, or between the two nations, would be a mistake, because it would increase the regulatory burden on companies, and it would also deprive the companies of Britain, deprive them of the excellent tribunal system which we have.
So the answer, Mr. Speaker, is I completely agree with my honourable friend, and he makes absolutely the right arguments.
Liz Chapman.
Mr. Speaker.
Thursday.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer questions 5, 11 and 14 together. The United Kingdom Government has introduced a single, flexible immigration system which works in the interests of the whole United Kingdom. A separate visa system would create an economic migration border between Scotland and the rest of the UK, which would be harmful for employers and far less attractive for workers.
Liz Chapman.
Mr. Speaker. Last week, the CBI conference raised the serious issue of the lack of people to do vital jobs we need done, especially in hospitality and food production. Both the Fraser Fallon Institute and the Highlands MSP, Kate Forbes, have suggested localised worker visa solutions to boost the economy. Why is the Secretary of State not listening to these smart voices, and why is he not acting in the best interest of the Scottish economy?
Well, Mr. Speaker, because we have a specific Scottish shortage occupation list for shortages, and that gives us flexibility. The salary rate is set at £20,960, and we believe that is the best way for those stakeholder bodies to make the representations to the Home Office to add those to the shortage occupation list.
Brendan O'Hara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 5 years ago, the Migration Advisory Committee said that the current system was failing remote communities. Recently published figures show that my Argyll and Bute constituency is suffering further depopulation, with the town of Rothesay in the Isle of Bute being particularly badly affected. But despite the overwhelming evidence to the contrary, this government still insists that the current system delivers for all parts of the UK. So could the Secretary of State explain how does a one-size-fits-all policy, simultaneously catering for the vastly different needs of densely populated urban areas and Argyll and Bute, deliver equally for both?
Well, Mr. Speaker, Argyll and Bute is a beautiful part of the United Kingdom. But what it lacks is infrastructure, what it lacks is public services, what it lacks is affordable housing, because the Scottish Government have failed in all those areas. But what it also has, with the rest of Scotland, is it has the problem of being the highest tax part of the United Kingdom. And that is the problem the Scottish Government have to address.
Deirdre Brett.
Mr. Speaker, the UK Government said that post-Brexit domestic employment would fill labour gaps. But the Executive Director of UK Hospitality Scotland has said that the gaps left by excluding EU workers have not been filled, with huge numbers of specialist vacancies left, such as chefs and managers. When will this government accept reality and stop destroying Scotland's economy in the name of a purist Brexit ideology?
Well, I think the honourable lady lives in a parallel universe. We have the highest net migration to the UK since records began, far higher than when we were in the EU. As I say, if you want to attract people to Scotland, stop making it the highest tax part of the United Kingdom.
Foster. Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State has correctly identified there's some who want to use immigration policy to enforce a hard border between England and Scotland as part of their aims to break up this union. But would he agree, and in his assessment did he identify, that what we need to do is make sure that immigration policy is not used as an alternative to offering the type of rewarding packages key workers deserve?
Yeah, absolutely, Mr. Speaker. We are one United Kingdom. We have no physical border. It is important that we treat immigration across the whole United Kingdom and give everyone equal opportunity.
We now come to Tommy Shepherd, SNP spokesperson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let's be clear here. We are talking about the administration of work permits for people from overseas who wish to work in Scotland on a temporary basis. Just about everyone thinks that would be better administered in Scotland, but the Secretary of State insists it should be centralised by his government in Westminster. His argument would be plausible if the UK could demonstrate that it is doing well with managing the migration service. But given the catastrophe that is the UK immigration system, when is he going to wake up and realise this would be better done in Scotland by the people who live there?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I would point the honourable gentleman to the Seasonal Agricultural Workers Scheme. 45,000 people with the ability to flex it up to 55,000, and those people come and work on a flexible system across the United Kingdom, and it's been proved to be a huge success.
Miss Shepherd.
Mr. Speaker, he is standing against everyone here, against experts, against academics, against representatives of industry, and even against the people of Scotland themselves, 28% of whom only think immigration is too high, and more than 6 out of 10 think it would benefit the country. So when is he going to stop being the Secretary of State against Scotland and be the Secretary of State for Scotland?
Well, it's very good that you're getting your lines written by Mike Russell, but listen, and it's an old one. It's an old one, and it's not a very good one. The reality is Scotland is the highest tax part of the United Kingdom. That is not attractive for people to work there. We have the highest ever net migration. And if the Scottish Government focused more on good public services, on good infrastructure and lower taxation, hopefully we've seen those high net migration figures see more people settle in Scotland.
Neil Hanby.
Number 7, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Carbon capture, utilisation and storage is a vital component of our journey to net zero. The Acorn project represents a huge opportunity for the north east of Scotland. As you would expect for any multi-billion-pound project, due diligence must now be followed.
Neil Hanby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Under Westminster rule, Bathgate, Linwood, Methil and Irvine are all no more. Grangemouth now risks being added to that sorry list, and with it hope for it developing carbon technologies. The Minister's quick to attack a Scottish Government with limited powers, but responsibility for the robbery and ruination of Scotland's energy sector and the continued denial of substantial funding for carbon capture rests squarely with the UK Government. What is his office doing to protect energy sector jobs and livelihoods in Scotland? And what is his department's excuse for utterly failing the people of Scotland?
Mr. Speaker, I had the pleasure of meeting the Cabinet Secretary from the Scottish Government this morning, together with the leader of the Falkirk Council, to discuss the situation at Grangemouth, and we are working together, both governments, Scottish Government, UK Government, working in hand to protect as many of the jobs as we possibly can. The Scottish cluster is expected to include at least one project located in Grangemouth, which I think is very welcome news.
Next bit.
Speaker.
Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I very much welcome this question. Very timely, given it's National Tree Week. Reforestation is a crucial part for us all to reduce carbon emissions and improve biodiversity across the country. Although this policy is devolved, the United Kingdom Government continues to work with the devolved administrations to deliver the UK-wide change in tree planting and establishments.
Slade Saxby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Conifers, which are the main species planted for productive forestry, account for just under half of the UK woodland area. Does my honourable friend agree with me that there should now be a UK-wide target for 60% of new planting to be productive forestry, allowing Scotland to lead the way for the UK as a whole to deliver a secure supply of raw materials to support British manufacturing and construction?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that excellent question. There are high ambitions across all of the United Kingdom to increase forestry planting. I agree with my honourable friend that we must secure a steady supply of the raw materials needed to support British construction and manufacturing industries.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, England. Don't normally get a cheer like that, but there you are. Last week, England announced there would be a new national park and forest in England. Has the Scottish Government and the Minister in particular got any intentions of doing something similar for Scotland? A new national park, a new forest for this occasion? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the honourable gentleman's question was about a national park. I know there's great ambitions for an additional national park in Scotland. My Scottish Conservative colleagues are pushing very hard for that. But if he needs more information, please do write to me and I will respond with the detail that he requires.
Question number 9, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, the UK Government works tirelessly to promote Scottish interests around the world through our extensive diplomatic network, forging business links and generating trade and investment. Our response to the Scottish Affairs Committee's recent inquiry on Scotland's international promotion highlights the extensive efforts we undertake to achieve this.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As one of the Prime Minister's trade envoys, it's always my pleasure to be championing British business overseas. From whisky to satellites, Scotland is home to some of the United Kingdom's most important exports. Can my right honourable friend update the House what work the Scotland Office is doing to support these important sectors in the international market?
Mr. Speaker, first of all, can I thank my honourable friend for his service as a trade envoy and tell him that last month I had the pleasure of travelling to Vietnam to boost Scotland's trade interests and to celebrate diplomatic links. Vietnam, it already offers huge opportunities for Scottish businesses, and in light of the UK's recent joining of the CPTPP, easy for you to say, Mr. Speaker, I am keen to highlight further trading opportunities for Scottish businesses in the Indo-Pacific region.
Final question, Patrick Ready.
I wonder if the Secretary of State could just clarify what he was saying earlier on. Does he think that it is legitimate for Scottish Government ministers to be able to travel overseas to promote the work of the Scottish Government?
Mr. Speaker, I've always been very clear that Scottish Government ministers can go overseas and promote areas that are devolved. But in the reserved areas, like the Constitution and Foreign Affairs, that is a matter for the UK Government, and they should not be using our embassies and our consulates to promote their plans for separation or their different views on the Middle East or anything else.